When we talk about Western films, a lot of names and faces come to mind, like Clint Eastwood. But there's another actor of the same caliber who often stole scenes. And that's Lee Van Cleef. Known for his black hat and piercing presence, Van Cleef appeared in over 170 films. Even though he achieved mainstream success, his life wasn't without its hardships. Interestingly, there was a different career he once considered, one that one of his children eventually pursued. Before Van Cleef became known for his sharp facial features, beady eyes, and low authoritative voice, he had a fairly ordinary beginning. He was born Clarence Leroy Van Cleef Jr. on January 9, 1925, in Somerville, New Jersey, to Marion Lavinia Van Fleet and Clarence Leroy Van Cleef Sr. His father was a pharmacist, and his mother was a concert pianist, which may have sparked his later interest in the arts. Though both his parents were of Dutch descent, their ancestry also included French, English, German, and Belgian roots. Van Cleef had a normal childhood and attended Somerville High School, graduating early at the age of 17. Like many young men of his time, he enlisted in the military due to the Second World War. In September 1942, he joined the United States Navy. After completing his training, served as a submarine chaser and later as a sonarman on the USS Incredible, a minesweeper. His naval service took him to various parts of the world, from the Caribbean to the Mediterranean, eventually leading him to southern France. In 1945, the Incredible moved to the Black Sea, where Van Cleef's unit carried out operations alongside the Soviet Navy in Sevastopol, Crimea. He was discharged in 1946, having earned the rank of sonarman first class. For his service, he received the Bronze Star and the Good Conduct Medal. After the war, Van Cleef returned to civilian life and briefly worked as an accountant. His journey into acting began by chance. Still employed as an accountant, he was offered an acting role that was set to begin the following Monday. Being responsible, he said he needed to give 2 weeks' notice. However, the acting opportunity came with an ultimatum: start Monday or not at all. As luck would have it, his employer overheard the conversation and fired him on the spot, freeing him to accept the acting role. With no job tying him down, Van Cleef began his acting career with a small role in Our Town, performed by the Little Theater Group in Clinton, New Jersey, played the part of a reader. From there, he continued to audition for roles and participate in local productions. His next performance was a step up. He played Joe Pendleton in the play Heaven Can Wait. Though he had only taken on 2 roles at that point, word of his talent began to spread. Visiting scouts noticed not only his powerful performances, but also his commanding stage presence. One thing led to another, and eventually a scout introduced him to talent agent Maynard Morris of the MCA agency in New York. Morris sent Van Cleef to audition at the Alvin Theater for the play Mr. Roberts, which premiered in 1948, became a significant stepping stone in Lee Van Cleef's career. He was part of the original production and caught the attention of film producer Stanley Kramer. Impressed by Van Cleef's performance, Kramer offered him a role in his upcoming film, the 1952 Western High Noon. Originally, Van Cleef was considered for the part of Deputy Harvey Pell, only if he agreed to have his distinctive nose surgically altered. Unwilling to change his appearance, he declined and was instead cast as Jack Colby, silent, intimidating gunslinger, his screen debut. Though he had no lines, his performance stood out and laid the groundwork for a career filled with memorable villainous roles. Thanks to his unmistakable look, few people know that Van Cleef's career nearly ended before it really began. In 1959, he was involved in a severe car accident that shattered his left kneecap. Doctors told him he'd never ride a horse again, a devastating blow for a Western actor. But Van Cleef's determination defied expectations. Just 6 months after the accident, he was back in the saddle, proving both his resilience and dedication. Being discovered by Kramer opened many doors. Van Cleef's career gained momentum, leading to steady work in westerns, including appearances in the CBS series Have Gun Will Travel, where he played Corbin Golis. He also landed roles in shows like Colt .45, Cimarron City, Laramie City, Detective, and State Trooper. Working back-to-back on these projects didn't bother Jim. In fact, he thrived under the pressure. For Van Cleef, acting was simply work, and as he once said, for a real actor, the type of part didn't matter. Throughout the 1960s, Van Cleef continued playing similar roles, appearing in series like Bonanza, Gunsmoke, and even The Twilight Zone, where he starred opposite Lee Marvin, and he remained cast in the same mold. Always the villain, his typecasting became a bittersweet reality. While it made him a recognizable face in the Western genre, it also limited the range of roles he was offered. In most of his performances, his character ended up dead by the end. Accepting this, Van Cleef embraced the villain archetype and made it his own. He delivered some of the most consistent and compelling performances of any on-screen antagonist. "Bad guys have always been my bag," he once said. "I look mean without even trying. Audiences just naturally hate me on screen. I could play a role in a tuxedo, and people would think I was rotten." He also remarked that villain roles offered far more depth and opportunity than leading man parts. Movies are full of leading men, most of whom aren't working. It's much harder to find a good villain. His skill at playing the bad guy often elevated the heroes he played opposite. He brought a believable intensity to his roles, guided by a personal philosophy about violence in film. Van Cleef believed in portraying real violence, not toy violence, arguing that if it's done realistically, it turns audiences off and makes them reflect on its consequences. His big international break came when Italian director Sergio Leone cast him alongside Clint Eastwood in the 1965 spaghetti western for a few dollars more. Finally, Van Cleef was given a heroic role, and he nailed it. He played Colonel Douglas Mortimer, a bounty hunter with a haunted past, and arguably outshone Eastwood with his brooding, mysterious presence. Audiences were drawn to Mortimer's layered personality, making the character even more compelling. The following year, returned to villainy in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, playing the cold, calculating Angel Eyes. That performance is now considered one of the finest villain portrayals in Western film history. His presence opposite Eastwood in that film further solidified his reputation as a screen legend. Both feared and admired, Eastwood's role as the good only amplified how unforgettable Van Cleef was as the bad. His portrayal of Angel Eyes in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly was everything a sadistic villain should be. Cold-blooded, ruthless, and relentless. He would stop at nothing to get what he wanted, even if it meant hurting innocent people along the way. But being cast in so many spaghetti westerns actually allowed Van Cleef to explore surprisingly heroic characters as well. Films like The Big Gun Down, Death Rides a Horse, Day of Anger, The Grand Duel saw him in leading or morally complex roles that stood apart from his earlier typecast as the villain. In Death Rides a Horse, his character Ryan was one of his most convincing portrayals as a protagonist, a man with a murky moral code, similar to Eastwood's iconic Man with No Name. Like Eastwood's character, Van Cleef's Ryan refused to draw his weapon on the innocent, but didn't hesitate to take down those who stood in his way. As the older and more experienced of the two leads, Van Cleef brought authority to the role, outshooting, outriding, and outsmarting John Philip Law's younger character. Despite his stoic demeanor and moral flaws, Ryan's fatherly admiration for Law's character added depth and heart to the performance as a new era in film arrived. Van Cleef began branching out from the dusty frontier of westerns. The 1980s marked a noticeable decline in his mainstream film appearances, but also gave him a chance to experiment with new genres. In 1980, he appeared opposite Chuck Norris in The Octagon, martial arts action film where he played a ninja mercenary and close friend of Norris's character, Scott James. Martial arts films were becoming wildly popular, so it was only fitting that Van Cleef explored this fresh territory in 1984. He took on the lead role in The Master, an NBC adventure series where he played a ninja master training a younger disciple. This was a major shift for Van Cleef. It was his first time headlining a TV series after mostly appearing in guest or supporting roles. Unfortunately, the show was short-lived and was cancelled after just 3 episodes. In a 1984 interview with Cinema magazine, Van Cleef reflected on his decision to take the role, said that after rising to fame in films, he deliberately avoided TV roles for a while. thinking he had entered a different category as an actor. But over time he came to realize the value of reaching audiences right in their living rooms, especially as rising ticket prices and changing habits made people less inclined to go to theaters. Van Cleef also dipped his toes into science fiction when he played a supporting role in John Carpenter's 1981 cult hit, Escape from New York. Interestingly, producer Stuart Cohen later revealed that Van Cleef was considered for a role in another Carpenter classic, The Thing. Though he ultimately lost the part of Gary to Donald Moffat, his connection with Carpenter showed that even late in his career, Van Cleef was still being considered for important roles in major projects. In total, Lee Van Cleef was credited with 90 film roles and 109 television appearances over his 38-year career. Whether playing the lead, a supporting role, a hardened villain, or a flawed hero, he always brought a commanding presence to the screen. His versatility as an actor allowed him to leave a lasting impression no matter the genre or the size of the role. Off-screen, Van Cleef had a personal life marked by love and loss. He married his first wife, Patsy Ruth Call, on December 10, 1943. Together, had 3 children, Anna, Nebra, and David. Unfortunately, the marriage ended in divorce in 1958. Working together and creating cinematic magic. Despite the language gap, Sergio Leone and Lee Van Cleef connected on a professional and creative level. They understood each other through the language of film, body language, expressions, and instinctual understanding of character. It was this collaboration that reignited Van Cleef's career and introduced him to a new generation of moviegoers. Van Cleef later admitted that had Leone not come knocking that day, would have likely left acting behind completely. At the time, he had stepped away from the industry and was running an interior decorating business just to make ends meet. When he got the call to meet a goofy guy at a hotel, he thought he was being hired to do a paint job, not realizing that the goofy guy was Sergio Leone, and the job offer would change the course of his life. He took the role of Colonel Mortimer, in for a few dollars more simply to pay his phone bill. But exactly 1 year later, on August 12th, he was called back to play Angel Eyes in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, followed immediately by a starring role in The Big Gundown. In just 1 year, Van Cleef had gone from being nearly forgotten to being a leading man in one of the most iconic film trilogies of all time. Elsie said, instead of making $1,777, he was now making $100 and something thousand. It wasn't just the money, it was the recognition, the validation, and the resurrection of a career that had almost disappeared in the end. Lee Van Cleef's journey from supporting player to iconic screen villain and then unlikely hero is one of Hollywood's most compelling stories. Despite typecasting, injuries, fading opportunities, and even false rumors, he never gave up completely. And when the right opportunity came, thanks to Sergio Leone, was ready. Lee Van Cleef passed away on December 16, 1989, just shy of his 65th birthday. Though he had suffered from heart disease for years and was living with a pacemaker, he continued to work up until the end. Throat cancer was also listed as a contributing factor in his death. His passing was deeply mourned, especially by his peers in the industry and fans around the world. At his funeral, many attendees wore cowboy hats and Western attire, tribute to the man who helped define the genre. Among them was Clint Eastwood, his co-star and longtime friend, who once said that Van Cleef had one of the better faces on the screen, and that you can't have a good protagonist without a strong antagonist. Cleef. Forest Lawn Memorial Park Cemetery in Hollywood Hills, California. On his headstone are the words "Best of the Bad." While Clint Eastwood and John Wayne may have been the heroes, it was Lee Van Cleef who made those stories unforgettable. His steely gaze, commanding presence, and gravelly voice gave weight to every scene he appeared in. The villain, the anti-hero, or a reluctant father figure, Van Cleef brought authenticity and edge to every role. And in doing so, he didn't just contribute to the Western genre, he helped define it. Working together and producing impressive results. Van Cleef recalled in an interview how Sergio Leone didn't speak much English during the filming of For a Few Dollars More. But for Van Cleef, that didn't matter. He instinctively understood what Leone wanted from him. There was an interpreter on set. But the director preferred to show the actors what he envisioned, often physically demonstrating scenes himself. Van Cleef said it was an intuitive process, he just knew what was expected of him without needing many words. Beyond his lasting impact on the Western genre, Lee Van Cleef also left behind a different kind of legacy one seen in his children. As an actor, Van Cleef was disciplined and committed to honing his craft. In an interview with filmmaker Alex Cox, he described acting as a trade that required constant refinement. There is no approach to acting other than sharpening your tools. He told Cox, "You learn how to use a sword, stunt fighting, how to use your voice, how to dance. All this is sharpening your tools. It's a basic necessity for all actors. But I don't think many actors are doing that today." Had he lived longer, Van Cleef expressed interest in directing. But since his life was cut short, it was up to his children to carry on some of those unfulfilled dreams. Fortunately, the same passion that drove Lee Van Cleef was passed on, and all four of his children pursued careers in the entertainment industry in their own right. His eldest son, Alan Van Cleef, followed most closely in his father's footsteps and became an actor. Over the course of his career, he appeared in more than 50 films and television shows. Some of his best-known roles include appearances in Rambo, First Blood Part 2, and The Running Man, though he didn't focus on westerns like his father, Alan. Made a name for himself across a range of genres, action, comedy, and drama, demonstrating his own versatility. Then there's David Van Cleef, who chose a different path by working behind the scenes. Rather than stepping into the spotlight, David became a respected producer. His portfolio includes major projects like The A-Team and Miami Vice. Despite being the son of a Hollywood actor, David started at the very bottom as a production assistant before working his way up. Over time, he built a reputation as one of the industry's most reliable and creative producers. Deborah Van Cleef, Lee's daughter, also entered the entertainment world and enjoyed a successful career as an actress. She appeared in more than 20 film and TV projects, including The Last Starfighter and Transcore. Much like her father and brothers, Deborah had a natural affinity for performing and honed her talents over the years, adding yet another branch to the Van Cleef artistic legacy. In the end, Lee Van Cleef was more than just a man in a black hat. He was a trailblazer, a fighter, a father, and a dedicated craftsman. His iconic performances may have often cast him as the villain, but off-screen, he was someone who deeply cared about his family, his art, and his place in the world of cinema. His legacy lives on not just in the dusty trails of classic westerns, but in the talent and passion of his children who continue to honor his name in the entertainment industry.